I'm Sister Ann Marshall. I'm a sister of St. Joseph and a graduate of St. Joseph's School of Nursing in 1956.
Sister Ann, when were you born?
I was born November 1931 in Hamilton. I lived a short time in Toronto until my father died, leaving 5 children, and we moved back to Hamilton. The youngest was 2 and the oldest was 7, and it was Depression time.
What was it like in Canada during the 1930s growing up?
Well, for me, everybody else was going through the same thing, so I never thought anything of it, particularly, you know. I mean, parents all went to rummage sales and such like, so I just found it normal growing up as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my siblings said they realized we were poor, but I can honestly say I didn't know that. Or maybe I didn't understand poor.
And where did you go to school?
I went to St. Joseph's Elementary School, to Loretto Academy for the first 3 years of high school, and then to Cathedral High School for grade 12 and 13.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like being in high school during the Second World War? Do you remember?
Well, we saved, we brought 25 cents into school to buy bonds, and we collected paper and tinfoil and that such like. But the Second World War didn't have a great meaning to children, particularly if you lived in a household that didn't have a member in the military. And with my father dead and living with my grandmother and my mother and siblings, that you knew it was going on, but its immediate impact. So I can honestly say I didn't realize a great deal about the Second World War.
Sister, you mentioned that you went to Cathedral High School after Loretto. What was it like at Cathedral?
It was wonderful. It was different. It was still a girls' high school, but it was multicultural. And because I didn't bring a history with me, I had more freedom. What I mean is the Sisters of Loretto taught me in grade school and in the first 3 years of high school. I went down to Cathedral, and for some reason I was chosen as the captain of the girls' basketball team. I just thought that was all you could ever hope to wish for in life, to be the captain of the senior girls' basketball team when I was in grade 12 or 13. I'm not positive which one it was now, as I look back. But I had, it was a very interesting, challenging time, and it was following grade 13 that I decided to become a sister.
And when did you decide, or how did you decide to become a sister?
Well, that's an interesting story. Actually, I read myself into the convent through books. I read Albert Schweitzer, Thomas Merton, Tom Dooley, Men of Mary Noel. And out of that, I decided that I really wanted to become a missionary. That was my interest. What happened was, when I told the priest in the parish, because you always had to get a letter recommending you to even apply, he said, "Oh, you can't leave your country to enter a convent." I said, "You can't." I was 18, and I thought what he meant was you couldn't do it. It wasn't possible. But I know now that wasn't what he meant. He said, no, you'll go to the Sisters of St. Joseph. That's how I ended there. Actually, I had applied to Sister Ursula from grade 13 to go into nursing. But in between the time I applied and had been accepted and graduating from high school, I decided I would enter instead.
And was Sister Ursula, was she a mentor to you?
No, I didn't know her at all. She was the director of the school, I guess, at the time. or the person that you applied to.
So you decided independently to enter the convent.
Very definitely, yes. I didn't have sister mentors at all. It was the books that I read and the desire in my heart of what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a missionary of some sort.
And when you were that age, at the time, what did you understand a missionary to be?
Well, it was from the books that I read, that they were out doing things, helping people that couldn't either help themselves or didn't have resources. And I knew it would be a foreign experience. But I don't know, I guess you're enthusiastic and full of dreams when you're young. And that's really how I got into the convent.
Can you describe what it was like when you entered the convent?
Well, I often look back and think of the poor sister who was the director of formation at the time. Because we were high school kids, you know, never having been away from home before. And it was kind of like you were in a boarding school, I guess you could say that. Except we began a discipline. Not that we didn't have it in those days and when I was growing up, but it was a discipline. It was a gentler time. And but your family was very important. You had dinner around the table every night. Nobody ever thought that you wouldn't be eating together. And so I entered from that atmosphere into the same type of atmosphere, you might say, except they were all women, and they were all fairly near my age. And we were in a formation program of learning how to be a sister, what it meant.
And when did you decide to get into nursing?
Well, because I had applied, the priest that had said, oh no, you can't go to another country to enter, knowing I had wanted to be a nurse, he said to the powers that be, this is what I understand in retrospect, that when it came time, after you make first vows, then you are pretty well assigned into some kind of ministry. And he said she should go into nursing. And that's how it happened. Because I had applied, I had shown an interest in that. They pursued that with me.
And what was it like when you arrived at the nursing school?
Well, I was excited, was looking forward to it, but I was now a sister. There's a whole big difference in being a student, because there were 3 sisters at the time. Was one school sister of Notre Dame and another sister of St. Joseph and myself. The students were a little leery of us because it was the same congregation who was in charge of the School of Nursing, as you can imagine. And so although I got along fine with them, but we didn't associate, we didn't live in the same residence with them, so we didn't have the same camaraderie with the students in your class.
Sister, you were a student at St. Joseph's School of Nursing between 1953 and 1956?
Correct.
Correct? Can you describe your daily routine when you first started nursing school? What did that entail?
Well, you see, I had this combination. I was a sister and a student at the same time. As sisters, we got up at 5:30 in the morning, and we would be in chapel at 10 minutes to 6. At 6:30, there would be Mass, at which time the Catholic students would come to the chapel. After Mass, at 7 o'clock, we would have breakfast, and then we immediately went either into the school for classes or onto the wards if you were then at that point in time assigned a ward. So you were in class. As a student nurse, we were in class, I would think, probably from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I could be corrected on that time. And then we would go on the wards for a couple of hours just to get acclimatized to what it was like facing a patient. But you see, the students had uniforms that gave a story. Either had a hat or they didn't. They didn't have a belt. But we were simply sisters, fully dressed as any of the other sisters. So we were confusing to the staff in the hospital, particularly the doctors, because if they wanted something, they would look for a sister. Because in that time we had very few registered nurses. In those days, it was before OHIP, and that's the Ontario Hospital, kind of like the insurance that the people had to. And it was before that time, so the sisters were funding the buildings of the hospitals, etc. And therefore, we couldn't afford to hire staff, so it was all sisters that that were in the heads of all the departments at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were a first-year student, as a sister on the floor, somebody wanted something, they came and asked you, and of course, I didn't know any more than any other first-year student.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit tense at times, trying to be who you were. And of course, on the other, your friends as students in the first or second year, they would think that you had, some kind of privilege. Of course, you didn't at all, but it was the presumption.
Sister Anne, did you enjoy the learning process?
Yes, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a missionary. And so I was, yes, I was challenged. As sisters, I think that we were sometimes put in positions before we were prepared for them. But that's just the way it was.
And when you graduated, what did you do?
Well, even before graduation, before I wrote my RNs, we would be assigned onto a floor. I was on pediatrics as a supervisor before I even wrote my registration. Again, because we didn't have registered nurses in those days. But I mean, I was as close to a registered nurse, and so we were often assigned as sisters into positions that we weren't particularly ready for, either emotionally or academically, professionally, but it had to be. And there was no great catastrophe as a result, except we were aware that we were not ready for it.
Did you have a way of coping with that? Was it difficult for you?
Of course it was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult because it's tied into being a sister. I was not final professed until I'm not positive when I graduated. Did I graduate in June or July? I made my final profession in July. I know that. July 16th, 1956. And so it's sometimes you got mixed up in your roles as being a nurse or being a sister. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, sister. And you graduated in 1956. And what was your job? You mentioned you were supervisor of pediatrics.
I was supervisor of pediatrics, and I did a fair amount of night supervision. Now, if you were the sister on night, you did have a registered nurse that worked alongside you. But otherwise, the hospital was about a 500-bed hospital. It was staffed at night and mostly in the day by students. You see, nursing in those days was an apprenticeship. Young women, mainly, until we came into the late 60s, they were all women, and they were given room and board in exchange for labor. Basically, is how the whole, right across the country, wasn't St. Joseph's, it was every place, that's how it was. And so I would be on nights as sisters again, we would be assigned by the superior or the CEO of the hospital, but we saw her as the sister superior. She would assign you into nights, and that would be from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 7 days a week, and could go on for 6 months. So you got into a rhythm of eating and sleeping and going to work. So it was easy, actually, except on the occasions when they were building different wings onto St. Joseph's Hospital. And then you had to cope with the building because your room never got moved. You were in the same room whether you worked days and nights. So that was a challenge at times, being kept awake with the building programs that were always seemed to be going on.
And during that time, Sister, did you have any mentors?
Yes, graduate nurses, the staff that was older than we were, yes, they were very helpful. They knew that we were kind of put adrift, you might say. But again, that was common. It wasn't just us. You know, people had this impression that because you were a sister, you knew more than you did. It was very unnerving at times. And yes, did I make mistakes? Of course I made mistakes. And but again, it was more or less, in those days, like, you didn't talk a lot about yourself. You didn't talk a lot about your own health. You asked one to play. Was it stressful? Of course it was stressful. But you were proud to be asked to contribute. So you just kept a stiff upper lip and kept right on doing it.
Sister Anne, can you describe your experience at the University of Western?
University of Western, yes. I went with 3 other sisters. One was studying English at the university. One was in the same program I was, and another one was in a master's in nursing. It was a wonderful experience because you were with the wider population. We were in the School of Nursing. However, we would go to the Victoria Hospital in London for anatomy and dissections, and we would be in the hospital on occasions doing some practice teaching. But with the general population, we did some science programs at the university. So although we were a school of nursing, we were also in the general population.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you at Western for?
I was at West. It was a 2-year program. However, because the government was trying to upgrade the teachers in schools of nursing, we were teaching in schools of nursing, which is post-secondary, but with nothing more than our RNs and some experience. So I guess the ministry decided that had to be upgraded. So there were bursaries given to schools of nursing who had persons who wanted to go ahead and upgrade their education. So we applied and received those bursaries. I went to Western, I think from 1962 to 63. Then I came home and worked out that year because you had to give a year's service for the year. And then I went back to complete my degree. I got my diploma the first year, and then I got my degree in the second year.
Your bachelor's of nursing and science?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. And after you acquired your Bachelor of Nursing Science, what was your role at St. Joseph's School of Nursing?
I was on the general staff. Sister Virginia was the director of the school at the time. Mm-hmm. And I would have taught nursing arts, and I can't remember a whole lot of other things. Again, as Virginia Freer will say, the sisters were always asked to do what everybody else didn't want to do when it came to selecting topics for that you would be responsible for in the school.
Was the student body different when you went back to teach?
In the 60s, yes, it was. It was the 60s were a very unsettled time in the whole of society. And people were beginning to, the Second World War was over. I guess baby boomers were starting to come through, and the children of baby boomers. And it was also the time that drugs started on the horizon. Because I remember in the School of Nursing, first time I ran into LSD, I had no idea what it was. None. But you see, the students knew it. And on one occasion, it was in the school. And it had to take another senior student to tell me what was wrong. And that's when I first learned about the drug culture, which, of course, you'd never have had in those earlier days.
Yes. And the daily routine, had it changed by the time you went back?
No, I think we were still on. I'm not positive. I'd have to have my memory refreshed. Whether we were on 8-hour shifts, the sisters weren't. We were still on the 12-hour. We could easily, the nurses themselves, there were more graduates by then because the government had started funding some of the hospitals by 59, 60. So yes, we would have been into, nurses would have been into an 8-hour day probably.
And was St. Joseph's Hospital receiving government funding?
Oh yes, well everybody did. Once the government came in, they received some funding. And exactly how it was distributed, I don't know. But they began probably to pay the salaries of the graduates.
And Sister, when did you become director of the School of Nursing?
I would say that would have been about 1969. I was only director for a short time. But as I said, it's more than 40 years, and I look back, it was a wonderful time. What was wonderful was that the board of directors of the hospital gave us freedom. And we could be creative as we wanted to be, and we did. The students, there was 130 in a class. So when I became the director, you would lecture to 130 young people on the skills of nursing or the knowledge of anatomy or whatever. 130 in a classroom. I took a look at that and I thought something's very wrong. Like you can't, how do you ever know what they're thinking, what their questions are? So I began to think of another way of doing education. Betty McGinnis was our anatomy teacher, and she was very creative. She was very good. And we started meeting as a staff. I had a wonderful staff, and we got along well. And so we said, something has to change. We can't go on teaching the brain to 130 people in an auditorium and expect that they understand what we're trying to do. So then we began thinking of another way of doing this. What else was that motivated us was that young people who had a compassionate heart and were sensitive to patients, and patients were in the hospital, say 2 and 3 weeks at a time, they related very well with the patient, but with a paper and pencil test they didn't do well at all. The people who were maybe brighter, they did well on a paper and pencil test, but at the bedside they could be a little distant or cool. So we knew something had to change. So we started this independent, individualized learning program at that time. And the faculty developed it. We still had to run a 3-year program of the traditional way. And so what I did was I took the staff off every Friday. I knew something had to suffer. I knew that the students had to suffer every Friday. They were just left on the wards with no teacher, nobody available to them. help them over their problems, except the staff that was on at the hospital. But they could be fed up having a whole lot of students there that needed help, and they were busy enough themselves. But we had to do that in order to come together, and they worked every Friday for at least a year and revised our total program. And at the end of Friday, I would have a chocolate cake made and a bottle of wine. I had to send them home happy because I wanted them to come back on Monday and start the grind all over again. And that began the change in our program. We brought a lot of educators, nursing educators, to come and spend time with us. McMaster University, Dr. Jim Anderson was very, very supportive of us. He was on the board of the school. The hospital board allowed us to have a board of the School of Nursing. Never heard of it. On the board, we had the student body elect 2 representatives from the students, within the students themselves. Also, faculty was on that board. We tried to open it up. We tried to bring a whole fresh look at education and the world, the evolving world that we were in, was changing so fast. And treatment of patients was changing. That so we brought as much together as we could to try to engage everybody in making this work. I found that evaluation was a priority. When I say evaluation, the students were being evaluated by the teachers, but I wasn't evaluating teachers. So the teachers drew up their own form, and it was a self-evaluation. They prepared it, they developed it, then they sent it in to me, and then I reviewed it, and then the 2 of us would sit down and go over it. And then they would sign it, agreeing or not agreeing with comments that were on it. Following that, one day I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Students are evaluated, faculty's evaluated, but the director isn't. So I sat down and developed a form and gave it to the staff so that they could evaluate me. So that, because I think evaluation is for growth promoting. Once you hire somebody, once you commit yourself to that person, then I think you have a moral obligation to help them grow into their job. Mm-hmm. So it was a very exciting, creative time that we were allowed, the hospital allowed us to do whatever. We set up labs. We no longer had 130 in a classroom. The students were in small groups of 6 or 8 with a teacher. And they related to that teacher, and they went on to the wards with that teacher. They were evaluated by that teacher. They could go into the tutorial lab anytime up till 11 o'clock at night and learn all the skills that we tried to teach in a classroom in an auditorium. So we made some major changes, and the College of Nurses at first was very skeptical. Galena Coffey was my assistant at the time, and I was on retreat in Pickering, and she phoned me there. She said, the College of Nurses said, you have to come to Toronto because they're not certain about this new way of educating. So I had to appear to the college.
Sister, you mentioned many changes went on with the transformation in education. Was there an actual change to the curriculum?
Oh yes, the curriculum was totally revised. And we introduced at that time, because of the major changes in society, we introduced liberal arts courses. We then connected with Mohawk, and we taught psychology, sociology, and English, integrated into the program. And then, as I said, McMaster, Dr. Jim Anderson introduced simulated learning, where you would have an actor or an actress come in, and then the students would have to come together and try to diagnose and plan a treatment, a nursing treatment for that patient.
Sister Anne, do you recall going to Toronto and defending the school's
Yes,
changes? What was
yes.
that like?
Well, I was younger, and I was so committed to what we were seeing, the changes in the students, that I do remember saying, and they said, well, this has never been done before, this individualized, independent, and audiovisual. That was a big thing, was the audiovisual. Because instead of teaching hand washing in an auditorium with the equipment, we had somebody do it up close and then it was put on a tape, and the student could go in and go over it 100 times with the principles, the actions, the connections, and then she would be tested. So she never had to have a teacher until she was ready. She asked to be tested. And I remember saying to them, because this was now in the 70s, early 70s, I said, well, maybe this is new in nursing, but I understand it. They're using this kind of teaching in grade 1. That wasn't very polite, maybe. And they never said we couldn't do it. So we kept right on. We developed it. We developed this whole protocol because it was so positive with the students.
And you could see the success.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the students loved it too, because they were planning their own education. When they were ready for testing, they asked to be tested, and the teacher who was with them was able to be there and know whether they should take the test, and then they moved on. They moved on when they were ready, not when the exam was set. The exams were always available.
And during that time period, when St. Joe's started these innovative educational programs, were the other schools in Hamilton aware of what was going on?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, I was so caught up in this whole process and meeting with teachers and involving the students. See, one of the things was, as sisters in the school, we lived in residence with the students. So you were well aware of what was happening in the residence. It wasn't that I lived some other place. So, no, I don't think so. Although, from going to university and getting my degree, I made good friends with the particular Hamilton General faculty. I do remember that. And we would talk, but I mean, we were so busy in your own school that we probably never. I might have, but I don't recall so much.
And Sister Anne, how long were you director for?
Well, see, I was only director probably from 69 to 72. In 1972, I was elected as the assistant general superior, and so I had to leave the school and come to the Mother House, which I found very difficult at that time because the program was in its infancy, and I was hoping that it would be able to go on, that it would grow and change and be successful. And it was, but you know, you hate leaving the baby when it's just born. But anyway, it was fine. It was time to go, I guess.
And when you left in 1972, what did you do after that?
In 1972, I was assigned as the assistant, as the healthcare coordinator. Now, that meant that I was responsible for attending meetings and knowing what was happening in all our institutions. At that time, that was a big assignment because we had 4 hospitals: St. Joseph's Hamilton, St. Joseph's Guelph, St. Mary's Kitchener, and St. Joseph's Brantford. We had 3 schools of nursing in Hamilton, Guelph, and Brantford, and Kitchener. we had St. Joseph's Villa in Dundas, and we had an RNA program in Brantford. So it was one big assignment. So mainly I was going from board meeting to hospital meetings and encouraging, because, I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of background myself.
Mm-hmm.
But to encourage and to keep things going and to bring back information to the General Superior about the state status of hospitals at that time. And there was a lot, because the government was trying to close some hospitals at that time. So attending those board meetings was very important. But the board members were wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Business people who supported us 100% in what we were doing, and were there to speak up to government for us. And
Sister Anne, do you remember when the St. Joseph's School of Nursing closed? Were you aware of what was going on?
Yes, I certainly knew what was going on. I knew it was going to be transferred. I knew that was an edict from government. Everybody, all the schools of nursing. Yes, it was a very mixed emotion, you know, because the residents' dimension of nursing in those days created a bond that to this day exists, perdures, for these people that were in the schools of nursing. And it's reflected in our alumni, which the school was, the last graduating class was 78, and yet every year the alumni can attract 300-400 people to the alumni dinner. But that's an unusual thing when there's been no active school in all those years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then I wondered, because when we went to Mohawk, that was taking in the schools of nursing in Hamilton plus Brantford, and so I just thought, I wonder if we'll go back to the way it used to be, having all the students lectured. And now I understand it didn't go quite that way, but it wasn't. We couldn't continue to create the way I would hope it would have gone.
Sister Anne, when you look back at the school, are you able to describe in a few words or in your own, from your own perspective, what was the philosophy of the school and the education program? If you can describe that.
The philosophy of the school was the dignity, started with the dignity of the person. And that we as human beings had to know ourselves if we were ever going to be able to interact in a compassionate, positive, respectful manner with somebody else. So it was a Catholic Christian philosophy, I would have to say, was the basis of what we did. And it was this respect for the students, respect for the patients, and promoting the growth of the individual. That was a big thing, that to give them a sense of self-confidence, because they were only young people and they had to relate at the bedside with sick adults that they didn't have the same life experience. So the philosophy of the school was to help that person appreciate who they were, their God-given gifts, and that they were able to take this gift of their life and share it in their care with somebody else.
Was there, if you recollect, a particular way that was taught? How do you teach respect and self-worth?
Okay, that's one of the reasons we changed. Where the teacher was able to mirror that in her or his interaction with the student. That was the big, big thing, for the student to be comfortable, to trust that teacher, and that the teacher would come to love the student with all their differences. Some were able to catch on quickly, some weren't, but we respected that individual difference. And that was my role with the faculty. Now, when they evaluated me, that was one of their criticisms. They said, "Sister, you spend more time with the students than you do with us." They were absolutely right. Because I lived with the students, I knew them so well, I was there 24 hours a day, and maybe they were more fun, in a sense, to be with, but it was the faculty, I was letting them down. So I stepped back and left it with the teacher to interact with the student to the greater degree than I had done before, and I made myself available to the staff. So we established relationships, bondings that were respectful and trustworthy.
So was there an instructional hour that you would give to the staff as to how to deliver the philosophy? No?
I don't think so. I just think it just was. Well, they were good women,
mm-hmm.
good women and men. They were wonderful people,
mm-hmm.
you know.
They understood.
Yes, and we brought in consultants to work with us as a group. So maybe yes, and from that point of view, they would talk to us. I can remember one came in. I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but he came in from the States, and he said, "Why do you have your students stand up to answer a question?" Oh, we had always done it. You know, that was the challenge. Why are you doing this? So we were delighted to have somebody challenge us, and then we all gave our answers, and then in the end we came together and said, but we're all adults. So I guess the way it went was through our in-service. I believed thoroughly in in-service and evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Sister Anne, when hiring was done at the school, was there a particular type of person that you were looking for?
Yes, very definitely.
What would be that type of person?
We were looking for somebody that was curious, somebody that was excited about themselves and about life, and that learned a little bit about the school before they even applied. So if you had somebody come in, which I did have, because we advertised, we were looking for faculty, and I asked one person, I can remember saying to her, and why do you think that you would like to work here? She said, because where I live is on the bus stop, the bus route. So you can imagine, we didn't pursue, well, we had the interview, but.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be she had to be other-centered in your interest, and you had to be professionally prepared.
Mm-hmm.
We had to have people who could think outside the box. Or if they couldn't, that didn't mind being challenged. So that's what we did, because everybody challenged everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it was exciting, creative time.
And you had an inspiring faculty from the sounds of it.
But the hospital board let us do it.
Mm-hmm.
Where if there were maybe another school, the board would never have done it. Dr. Galloway was wonderful. Because when we set up this lab and then hired somebody to work till 11 at night, a registered nurse just in a lab over at the school, that was money going out of the hospital. But he did speak to me once about it, but it never occurred to me. I mean, I was so interested in what I was doing,
mm-hmm.
and I didn't have to do the budget. And I said, but it's going to be so much better, doctor. I can't imagine anybody would object. It was so naive. However, he never did. He let me to go ahead with the plans.
Sister Anne, when you left your position as director of the School of Nursing, and you were first counselor of the congregation, during that time, were you teaching at all?
No, I never went back. And that's right, because you leave then to the next person that's been hired to take on that job. That's their responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I never did go back.
And from that time period when you left, from 1972 thereafter, can you describe that time? in your life, what you did, your work?
Well, from 72 to 80, I was the first counselor, and then from 80 to 89, I was the general superior of the congregation. So, being the general superior is the overall administration of the organization, but also of the bringing together in unity the congregation. So there's two separate parts of one has to do with the sisters, the community I live with, of which I am just a part, and then the administration of the organization, the management part, of which we had a lay advisory committee right from 1980 on. We had a lay advisory committee, which were two persons from each of our hospital boards that came together to advise the congregation on management financial matters, so that we got the best thinking because it was a big organization when you think of it. We had sisters out west in Guatemala, you know, they were around the world. So one person couldn't, or even a group, there were like, there's a general superior and 4 counselors, and like we were all women without a heck of a lot of background in that. So.
Sister Anne, can you describe the missionary work that you've done in Jamaica and how that came about?
Well, as I said, I always wanted to be a missionary, so when I was finished in 89, across the desk came requests for people to go to different countries to help. I thought, how wonderful. So I applied to the Jamaican project because it spoke English. I was now 57. I thought, I can't go and start to learn another language at my age. And I was accepted, and I went, and another sister joined me. So we went to Anotto Bay, which is on the north coast, a poor area. It was, at one time, sugar plantation. When we were there, it was banana, mainly, and fishing out around, but just little fishing boats, and those were big. And the sister who went with me, Sister Katrina, she was public health, and she was a grad of McMaster School of Nursing before she entered. No, she graduated after she entered, but she had applied, she had started before she entered. And we went there. We didn't know what we would do. But what happened was that the school principal asked us to teach family life. Now, can you imagine 2 white-haired women teaching family life in Jamaica, with a whole different culture, to young people? Anyway, what happened was we were teaching in a government school of over 1,000 children, and what we found out was that the literacy rate was unbelievably lacking. There was no literacy. They couldn't read or write. So after the second year of doing that, we developed a total program. We went and got culturally sensitive materials and gave it to the principal and said, you assigned Jamaicans to teach this. And we started doing literacy. And it was slow going at first, as you can imagine. Some other culture people coming in deciding they were going to teach literacy in your school if you were a teacher. Anyway, eventually, after a couple of years, we got along very well. Rotary in Hamilton funded the building that they put up on the school property down there, and it was dumped by the children, the reading room. So we started official programs, and the sponsor was Jamaica Self-Help from Peterborough, Ontario. Were very good to us right from the beginning. And through that, CETA got involved. And so we would come home and raise funds in our summer home because we needed, CETA would match what we raised. And then we were able to hire teachers, which were just women off the street that we taught. We had to come home ourselves and learn how to teach abacada because we were nurses. We did. We've had the outcome of it all, I was there 18 years, is that we have qualified teachers in Jamaica right now teaching in the school system that went through this literacy program teaching children. We ran an adult literacy, and we have people that the people from the U.S., they were Peace Corps volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
Peace Corps volunteers came into the town and worked with us, and one worked with me in the adult literacy program to get adults that couldn't read or write to be able to come to a point of getting a job, which they did. But it was all done, you see, on volunteer. There wasn't a cent for anybody because there was no money. But anyway, when I left there, we had these reading programs which were strongly endorsed by the Ministry of Education in Jamaica in 2 government schools and in 2 church-sponsored schools, and all by people that we trained off the street and then went on to get their own education.
Sister Anne, how frequently during that time period did you go to Jamaica?
Since I left,
Mm-hmm.
I came home here in the end of June '07, and I went back a year and a half ago to the mission for 3 weeks. It was wonderful, as if I'd never left, and everything is going on. Stacy Wilson is the point person in Jamaica and doing very well with this, and at the same time having to go out of town. She's married, she lives way up in the hills, and she's getting her degree. So,
Sister Anne, I read a little bit that you had been involved in Martha House and the prison in Hamilton. Can you describe your missionary work that you did in both locations?
well, actually, we visited, Sister Katrina and I visited in the prisons Friday evening because we were asked, they were said that there weren't enough people just going in when prisoners asked us to talk to somebody. Like so they came to here and they said, can't any sisters go? So Sister Katrina and I, both in leadership, I mean, who else did we ask? So we thought we better try it ourselves. So we would go there on Friday evening. And mainly we just met with young boys that wanted to talk to somebody, I guess even to get out of the lockup and go into a room with another human being. And that could have been the motivation, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we did that. It was very inspiring for me. I mean, even to go through the whole system of the Hamilton Detention Center and to get up into a pod to visit. Like, I learned even just from the experience.
And during what years did you visit the prison?
Well, now that would be in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
early 80s, I would think. It was
Okay.
early.
And Martha House?
And Martha House, well, the Good Shepherd brothers wanted to establish a home for abused women and women who were put out of their homes. So they came to the congregation and asked if we would, if any sisters would be able to be involved in this. And so Sister Madeline Roth was our first director of Martha House. And the sisters lived on the top floor. And so I would go here, I would leave the mother house doing my business, what I had to do in the daytime here, and then I'd go to Martha House and have supper and help around with the women and the children and get the kids to bed, and then go upstairs where we lived. There were 4 or 5 of us that lived on the 3rd floor. And I learned lots of things there, lots and lots. One is about women that didn't have any money and they were smoking, and they were smoking a whole lot in that house when we first went there until the ban went on, that you could go out and buy a single cigarette at the drugstore. I never knew. I learned a lot from being with these women, what they went through, why they were there, and the security we had to have in the building, because if people found out where they were or tried to get them. And the children were also confused. And but it was a very good 3 or 4 years that I lived there. I quite like. I've always enjoyed every ministry that I've ever done. So,
Sister Ann, there's something interesting that I've noticed about you, and maybe this is the last question I'll ask you to reflect on, is that you were born in Hamilton and you went to school here, you went to nursing school here, you're director of the nursing school, you were also the first counselor of the congregation here, and then the superior well-being located here, and Mother House, Martha House, and the Hamilton prison. Do you ever think about how much Hamilton needed you to be here for Hamilton?
no, my
As a-
dear,
as a
never
place-
crossed my mind.
As a place of happening where in your local environment how much you've contributed to the well-being of your immediate area. And I wondered how you felt about Hamilton. If you've ever...
I guess I never ever thought of that. I just know that I've been given wonderful opportunities to serve. I really have. And out of these, I've grown. I've grown and changed myself.
One second, sister. I've just turned off the camera so that
Okay.
noise. We can actually edit that out.
Okay.
So I
But
will...
I don't know if I have much more to say anyway.
I know it's almost at the end, sister, and it's only two or three more minutes.
Okay.
So you can
Go.
pick up where you were saying.
Okay.
So, sister, could you reflect a little bit more on life here? And you were given many opportunities.
Many
here.
opportunities to serve. And the people that I have met have enriched my life so much that I know that I have to give back from what I have received. And also the congregation has been a home and a family for me. And without them, I could never have accomplished half the things I've done in my life. So I'm very grateful for all these opportunities and for the people that have come into my life.
And Sister Ann, at present, what are you up to in terms of...
Well, at present I'm down at St. Bridget's School, which is an inner city school in Hamilton.
Mhm.
I went there just to see, when I came home from Jamaica, if there was something that I could do there that might be helpful. And so the principal, Julie Angelillo, asked me when I was there about 3 months if I would teach religion in the school. I was so very surprised because I'm not a school teacher through the school board. So I said yes, but the Jamaican experience prepared me because our pastor was murdered down there in 2001. And from that time on, Sister Nancy Sullivan had to take over the administration of 6 churches. And so I got involved in the education, the religious education at that time. So I felt prepared from Jamaica to come back to Hamilton. But what's interesting is that at St. Bridget's right now, we are doing Christian meditation for children
Mhm.
from kindergarten to grade 8. And every single child is involved in it in some way and enjoying it. So much so that the junior kindergarten teacher just asked me last week, would I please come in and start in her class? Now, I never dreamt of going into the little ones, but I did, and they were so receptive, so open. So I bring prayer mats and a candle and a prayer bear, and they sit around maybe for 2 minutes only with their eyes closed, and they say a mantra. Come, Lord Jesus, into my heart. It's very precious, but it's a good thing. The older children like it because it's a time of quiet. Nothing is said. They just sit there quietly for up to 10 minutes. They can sit quietly. So, I mean, I am so blessed to be able to have all these opportunities, to do all these things, to be as creative as I want to be, and people seem to encourage it, so I have nothing that I can, all I can say is thanks be to God for the gift of the Sisters of St. Joseph and the people in my life.